and welcome back to another week of Just Gay Stuff podcast. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Jess.
I forgot to sing the intro. I was too busy listening to what I thought you said was just Bobs.
No, Just Gay Stuff.
Oh, is that what you say?
Here we are for another week at Just Gay Stuff.
We are. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
It's almost like you're a singer for a living.
Nah, I couldn't do it.
I make this joke every time and you're probably sick of hearing it.
Nah,
But
never sick of hearing your voice.
that's not what you said before.
Our listeners might be.
Well, before we get into this episode, I don't know if you or even maybe our listeners have noticed
Oh, they'll know.
there's stuff that's kind of been bothering me about our community lately.
They'll know.
Especially on like TikTok and Instagram and stuff. And I'm of course talking about like people like Fletcher, Jojo Siwa and Billie Eilish.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more talking about the fact that all of these women have been out in the queer community, but now suddenly because they're dating men, people have gone, oh no, they're less queer. And just because these women are now dating someone of the opposite sex, it doesn't make them any less queer.
No, it doesn't.
We often see so much bi erasure, which I'm dumbfounded by, especially as someone who
Has been there.
and discovered myself through bisexuality.
But we'll get there because you are now identifying as a lesbian. So
I am.
You have evolved that sexuality train.
which is a whole different topic in itself, I
is.
guess. I think my thing is, whilst yes, Jojo Siwa went about it the wrong way in the fact that she cheated on her partner
on live
television, and then there was a whole drama. I don't think you can discriminate her for her own self-discovery journey. Like we say every week on the podcast, our self-discovery journey is continuing. And like, especially from Fletcher, because I think, not from Fletcher, from the fans of Fletcher herself, because they're usually lesbians, the hate that I've seen, it makes my blood boil a little bit, because how can we be a community that preaches inclusion, acceptance, diversity,
and then not accept
and then
yourself.
and then the minute that someone fits differently to your norm,
It makes us as bad as the people who we're always fighting against.
Yeah, it makes us like as bad as the homophobic people, essentially, because what?
Look, I'm glad that you brought this up because it is still everywhere on the internet. And while we don't generally get too caught up in the gossip column
The gossip
stuff,
drama. I know it's a bit different for us.
I do have some opinions that are, I think, relevant on the matter. So let's pull a few things apart. We'll start with Jojo.
Yeah.
If you've watched any of the docos that she's been in about being a child star, she has been the sole breadwinner from her family since she was on Dance Mums. And I feel like that kind of feeds into so much smoke being blown up her ass your whole life. And she's had so much responsibility that it is bound to have bred some sort of entitlement into her, which I think explains the majority of Jojo's behavior and her decision making. And so I think Jojo thinks she can do whatever she wants
without reactions.
Yeah, well, as long as she's getting publicity, I think she thinks it's fine.
Well, all good publicity. She would have had it drilled into her head.
Yeah,
all good publicity is good publicity.
Exactly.
And like you said, her upbringing has been, before she was even on Dance Mums, her mum had put her in beauty pageants.
Exactly.
And was bleaching her hair blonde from the ages of 3 years old.
Yeah. So while I don't think it is okay for her emotionally cheating on a partner on reality TV and leaving Kath Ebbs, her previous partner, without any answers, I can understand that you never know who you are going to fall for. And obviously she has fallen for her new partner, Chris. You don't know who you're going to spawn an emotional or romantic connection with, but there is a way to go about it. Jojo did not handle it with a lot of care and respect for Kath. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah, I agree. That's the biggest problem within that whole situation with Jojo Siwa is, and we've said it quite often on the podcast before, we can say that we're queer and we're queer. We have this, but you don't know who you're going to meet in the future or in the lifetime that might go, oh, this is a male and suddenly I have this
doesn't take that queerness
attraction.
Away from you.
No, it doesn't. But I do agree that she went about it in the wrong way. And again, maybe that does come back to that sense of entitlement. And I do think maybe it was a little bit of a trauma bond in the beginning because he was the one to stand up for her against Mickey Rourke.
Yeah, when he was kind of
bashing the gay stereotype.
Yeah, he was being quite
thing.
rude. And she stood up for the queer community in that
She did,
aspect.
and I'm very proud of that. I think, unfortunately, the backlash now being such a public figure herself has also then caused his fans to be like, oh, well, he was right. Look at her going straight back to a man, blah, blah, blah.
I think the biggest problem now is that the backlash coming from the queer community is because of JoJo's actions rather than what she said. So like, you know, now she's saying, oh, fuck the L, I'm moving to the Q, which is disrespectful in most contexts. And I think that the context that JoJo was saying this in was that like, this is what she loves about sexuality. You can fall anywhere under this umbrella and still remain queer, and you can switch between the letters as you grow and you evolve.
Yeah.
And she believes she's no longer a lesbian, but she'll now identify as queer, which is her right. But the latest is also now that she has said she felt pressured by the queer community to call herself a lesbian.
Yeah.
And
that's not okay.
That's not okay, because besides people shipping her with maybe her previous partners, whether they were lesbian or just female, whatever.
Yeah.
I think the only pressure that you put on someone is the pressure from yourself.
Yeah.
She didn't have to identify as anything that she wasn't.
No.
And no one made her say, I'm a lesbian. No one made her say she was queer, you know?
I think she also comes from a very hard place, you know, being a childhood star, interacted with like Nickelodeon and Disney, and then she became such a queer icon or lesbian icon once Nickelodeon didn't invite her to the Nick Awards.
But this is the thing.
Stuff like that.
She was the one out here going, oh, I'm gay and I created gay pop, and like, who pressured her into saying that shit? No one.
No one.
Well, so like you can understand why people have taken offense to these things in context and out of context. I think if you're going to have a stab at the people who have supported you throughout your fame, coming out and self-discovery, you're going to get clapped back at.
Oh, that's what I was going to say was I think people forget that JoJo is very young and she's had this platform her whole life. So can you imagine the pressures of, like you said, being the breadwinner in your family and having the spotlight on you 24/7? She's only just turned 22, I believe.
Yeah, she's not lived without the paparazzi,
so
essentially.
Her cognitive, she's not really there properly.
And they say like cognitive development is still going until
At
25.
Yeah. So she's learning.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about Fletcher, because this is a hard one for me.
This is a big one. I need the popcorn.
I see both sides of the coin in this argument, and I have to say, like, as a lesbian, I am a bit upset about Fletcher.
To be fair, you also haven't always identified as a lesbian.
No,
You've
and see, I
disliked
still
the word.
I'm still toying with that word. But look, it might affect me more because I am such a diehard fan. So Fletcher, from the beginning of her career, she never exclusively said she was a lesbian. She's always branded herself as queer and whatever queer looks like for her, and that's great, and that's all good and well. However, you have to admit that she made her fame and her living off the back of
From
the lesbians. Is that okay? Well, yeah, it's okay. Fletcher's been out. She's been proud. She's been all for the lesbians, and she's definitely played into the lesbian fantasy.
Yeah. She queer baiting?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Now, where people are upset is Fletcher is telling us that she never thought she would fall for a guy, but here she is. To her surprise, she's found one she doesn't dislike. She's openly said she didn't know how to tell her queer fans that essentially she'll be presenting in a straight relationship.
Yeah.
We know that it still means that she can identify as queer.
Yeah.
I think the problem people are saying that it's not correct is because she's essentially erased the person that she was on social media before this.
Yeah.
So now her queerness in practice queerness in practice for everyone to see is now gone.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the erasure that the fans are feeling.
Yeah.
I think they're all feeling like her queerness was relevant when it served her, but now that it's not serving her, it's okay to erase it. And I get it. Look, the bottom line is we would be completely hypocritical to judge her based on her relationships, but I think a lot of people are just upset because it's seeming like she's erased those parts of the community that have supported her, and actions speak louder than words at the end of the day.
That's
she can
true.
say she's still queer, but if you're taking away all of that part of you from your fans...
It's almost like she had put up a queer facade and suddenly it's like, okay, bye.
Yes, it does kind of feel like that. And I see a lot of her fans have been saying they're feeling the erasure because she was so outwardly queer.
Yeah.
And then for her to be presenting in a straight relationship now diminishes their queerness because it gives homophobic people another reason to say, oh, look, you just haven't found the right man yet, like her.
Yeah.
And while I agree with that statement and I can see exactly where people are coming from, I do have to say, devil's advocate over here, Fletcher is not responsible for your sexual journey and
That's
your
true.
sexuality.
That's true.
So while I do think she has a responsibility to be nurturing of her fans, I don't think that she is responsible for the people in your life that are having bigoted opinions and homophobic comments towards you. I can see where people are saying that her actions can feed into it,
Yeah.
but I don't think that responsibility is her weight to bear. I do think it is a bit mean, and I agree with the fans when they say for her to release such a straight song in Pride Month.
Yeah, that's a bit controversial.
That was a bit hurtful, I feel.
I can understand, like you said, how the fans have suddenly taken such a big jump into, oh, this is not okay kind of thing. And at first I didn't understand it, but even just re-listening to what we've previously spoken about now, the fact that she has erased parts of herself. That's like, I can't be my authentic true self, or this was just a phase. So you feel like, that's what I feel like. I feel like the words phase will come out.
See, in a recent
again.
interview I saw with her, she was saying how a man doesn't complete her. She doesn't need a man. It's not about that. She was like, oh, but before I met him, that was just an error of me. And it's like, error is kind of like, oh, that's a phase.
Yeah, I think, I don't know whether it's her publicity training or her discussions, it's the wrong choice of words for the community that has supported her for such a long time. And I can understand from that point of view where fans are getting upset. Like, we went and saw Fletcher when she was here.
The whole room, lesbians.
For my birthday, and it was full, packed to the brim. We were like right at the barriers.
Yeah.
All with lesbians supporting her. Like, I don't like the negativity towards her. I don't think we should be erasing parts of ourselves, whether it's from Fletcher or whether it's from the queer community going, oh, well, we don't like her anymore because suddenly she's acting cis or straight or whatever. And like you've said, she's never explicitly said, hey, I'm just a lesbian or I'm just queer. Or in case of saying she's just queer, queer is a spectrum.
Exactly.
Queer is like a whole rainbow, essentially.
So like, everyone can say what they want to say, and I can be understanding about her queerness. I'm definitely not a hater. But I would also be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed that she wasn't just for the girls. And I think it was nice to have a different kind of sexual empowerment that Fletcher admitted for the lesbians. I do feel like it is kind of tainted now. But again, like JoJo, it's more the actions of the person more than their actual journey.
That's what it is. And I think sometimes people forget, especially it would be incredibly hard as a person in the spotlight. Yeah, okay, yes, you are a person and yes, you have feelings, but you also have to understand that you've put yourself in this position, you've put yourself in the spotlight, so people are idolizing you and looking up to you.
And the bottom line for me is don't blame your fans.
No.
Because JoJo has then gone, oh, I've been pressured by the lesbians, and then Fletcher said, I was pressured to stay in my straight closet because of my fans. Well, no one forced you to do anything.
A straight closet, please.
So anyway, well, she didn't say that. That wasn't verbatim, but that's how I felt about it. So in spite of all of this gossip, I think this is the perfect time to talk about the spectrum of sexuality.
Oh, I feel like I just said that.
Well, I don't need to ask you, do you think it is a spectrum?
Yes.
Well, because I think it definitely is. In society, we don't have down the line just straight and just gay or just bi. Like in our labels episode, there are so many different sexualities that fall across this big, long line. And there is a range of evidence from biology, psychology, neuroscience, and social studies that prove the idea that sexuality is in fact a spectrum and not just two definitive boxes of hetero and homo.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the supports of this. And the first one I want to introduce to everybody is the Kinsey scale.
What the hell is that?
I was going to ask you if you knew, but that reaction tells me everything.
No idea. Please enlighten me.
Alfred Kinsey was a sex researcher that conducted studies in the 1940s and 1950s to gain a better understanding of human sexual behaviour.
What an interesting time.
Yeah, and I'm like, why in that time would you want to study sexual behaviour? But anyway, between him and his research team, he developed a program that consisted of lengthy face-to-face interviews and a series of questions that allowed individuals to speak openly and honestly about their sexual history. He even devised a coding system to ensure that all participants at the time could remain completely anonymous, especially considering the time period that it took place
Yeah,
in.
that's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah. So Kinsey and his team interviewed 18,000 participants from varying backgrounds, locations, and professions and collected enough evidence to create what we call the Kinsey scale.
Wow.
So
I'm already like half imagining it.
Yeah.
Like,
It's like a spectrum.
Yeah.
So the Kinsey scale is a 7-point scale that measures the degree of a person's sexual attraction to the same or opposite sex.
Right.
If we start at 0, that reads exclusively heterosexual, to 6 being exclusively homosexual. And the 7th point is a category for people that identify as asexual.
Oh, that's cool.
Which we know is like no sexual attraction at all.
I find that really fascinating that, like we've said, a lot of people haven't really discovered the terms like asexuality or something like that, but they were clearly discovered back in the 1900s.
Yeah, totally. They actually have labels from 0 to 6 and then the 7th being asexual. So I'm going to read you these because I think they're quite funny.
Okay.
So 0 being exclusively heterosexual.
Right.
Going to 1, predominantly heterosexual, only incidentally homosexual.
How do you become incidentally homosexual?
You know the joke that's like, oh, I was naked and I slipped and fell inside him.
Oh, no.
The next one, predominantly heterosexual, but more than incidentally homosexual.
So we did some butt stuff too.
Yeah. 3 being equally heterosexual and homosexual. So that's all of our bi people
Our
out
bi
there.
baddies.
Yep. 4, predominantly homosexual, but more than incidentally heterosexual. 5, predominantly homosexual, only incidentally heterosexual.
Interesting.
There was an incident and I was accidentally straight for 2 seconds.
Gosh, shit, calm down. No, I can understand that because I feel like that's where people like you and me who identify as queer or gay can still have an attraction towards a man and go, oh, they look nice.
Yeah.
Don't want anything to do with them sexually right now. But
yeah. I also think it really divides because at the same time, like, we can both be attracted to, say, like, male sexual genitals, but we just don't like the person that's attached to it.
I think, again, everything comes back to that emotional connection and the attachment that you form with a person.
Definitely.
Not body parts or genitalia.
Yeah. Okay. And 6, exclusively homo, which is, you know, what
Just gay stuff podcast.
What we think we identify as, but, you know, it's an evolution. And then, of course, the 7th scale being asexual. So no sociosexual contacts or reactions.
That's really cool. I'm not normally one for ratings or labels or stuff like that, but I like that.
But it's like, you can see on this scale, there's a place for everybody.
Yeah, I like.
And it's a long scale.
I like that in terms of spectrum, as we've been speaking about it, and I like it in terms of everyone has a place.
Mm-hmm. So based on Alfred's research, he found that majority of the participants, while their anonymity was ensured, fell somewhere in the middle of the scale and not exclusively heterosexual or homosexual. In a particular quote, he states that males specifically do not represent 2 distinct populations of heterosexual and homosexual. He went on to say, the world is not divided into sheep and goats.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great analogy.
Well, it's so true because as a society, we're so quick to want to put someone in a box, and at the end of the day, no one fits in a box.
Well, exactly. No one does, because if we were all the same, life would be so boring. Not one person is the same. Even if you have identical twins, they don't have the same personality.
Yeah, exactly. And I often think about this, like when some straight guys get so homophobic over 2 men having sex, but they want their girlfriends to do anal so bad.
Jesus.
A butt is a butt, my guy. No matter which way you paint it or who it's attached to, it's still a butt. So you either like it or you don't.
I feel like some, especially heterosexual men, have like, I don't know whether it's a fantasy or have a thing, but I feel like they're more inclined to want to try or feel something out. If, like you said, a butt is a butt.
I just feel like sexual exploration is for everybody.
Yeah, imagine if we went back to the 70s when everyone was like high and going through the sexual exploration.
Exactly. Now, some people like to boycott Kinsey's research by saying his participants were targeted because a lot of them were inmates, sex workers, or people that were openly willing to talk about taboo subjects. But regardless of these criticisms, Kinsey's research still finds that sexual behaviour and attractions between individual humans were vastly different and do not fall into those distinctive 2 boxes.
I don't think it matters where they came from. I can understand why people had those opinions
back then, especially.
or had
oh, you're talking to the dregs of society.
Yeah.
Well, no, you're talking
how
to
dare you? You're just talking to people, essentially. And I think in saying that, it probably gave those people a voice, a chance to be heard and be listened to.
Yeah. So Alfred Kinsey, to finish off that section, completely believes that sexuality is a giant spectrum.
Because it is.
And most of us fall between the 0 and the 6 rather than definitively
There's no
or the
definitive.
6.
You can't tell me that there's one person that's just like, nope, I'm just this straight man. I don't know why I did that voice. No, I'm just this gay girly over here. Nothing. You can't tell me. Like
you are just that gay girly.
No, I know, but you can't tell me. Like we've said before, you don't know who you're going to meet, who you might suddenly form an attraction to or fall in love with or like whatever. You don't know. There could be a man, could be a woman, who could be
non-binary,
trans.
Exactly. So let's talk about our brains and some neuro findings.
Oh.
So studies using brain imaging have found that sexual attraction is influenced by a range of different structures and processes and not by choice.
Can you just say that part again?
And not by choice.
Yeah, just so people are aware.
So everyone out there that has ever heard the quote, the lifestyle you chose, that is completely incorrect.
And you want to know why? Science said so.
Yeah. You did not choose your sexuality. In fact, it chose you.
Yeah.
Or more like your brain told you what you liked.
The wand didn't choose the wizard, Harry.
Exactly. The wand chooses the wizard. Okay. So neuroimaging studies have identified that different regions of the brain are activated during different phases of a sexual cycle, including sexual motivation and arousal. These regions include the amygdala, the insula, and the prefrontal cortex. So in a study in 2008, certain regions of that in a homosexual man resembled the same regions in a heterosexual woman and vice versa. So essentially, this is kind of saying the homosexual man had the same makeup in those parts of the brain as a heterosexual woman, which is why he was attracted to a man and vice versa.
Yeah, okay.
And while science agrees that a lot more research needs to be done to find exactly what does determine our sexuality, they do know that those 3 main parts of our brain are all connected to sexuality, sexual motivation, arousal, and our emotional connections.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I like learning about the brain.
I feel like it's all science, really.
It is. Everything's science. We're all a biological makeup, so...
yeah, I also feel like take us all apart. No one is ever going to be the same as the person next to them. There is also proof that those of us that are neurospicy
there's a lot of us
are more likely to identify on the spectrum of sexuality than in the rigid boxes of purely heterosexual or purely homosexual.
That makes sense.
This is because our neurospicy friends have already felt the burden of not fitting into neurotypical norms, so they feel more comfortable to express and explore sexuality and gender outside of typical norms also.
That makes so much sense.
It does make sense. A lot of the people that I know that are neurospicy are in the LGBT umbrella.
Actually, yeah, same now that I think of it.
Or they don't really identify with homosexual or heterosexual.
Yeah.
So they might not exclusively identify as queer, but they aren't willing to put themselves in a box.
They're not in a box, or they just don't care.
Yeah.
They don't have any like homophobia
Fluid.
or hate or whatever.
Literally
They're
fluid.
just there.
Now I want to talk about a very influential psychologist named Lisa Diamond.
I feel like I've heard her name before.
Well, the psychology of sexual orientation is Lisa's whole thing.
Okay.
Lisa Diamond, she's a psychologist in the USA, has found that while social norms believe that sexuality is fixed, she believes, as well as a lot of us, that sexuality is something that can evolve with time, experience, and relationship context.
That's what it is. Everything within, whether it's like friendship or relationship, sexuality, everything is by an environmental upbringing, essentially. So, like, of course, that's based on the emotional context.
And we were talking about your bisexuality before.
Yeah, just before.
And now you're identifying as something different to that.
Yeah.
And that's like the evolution of your sexuality and your journey.
Yeah, my journey. I think this is where I struggle with the whole Fletcher and Jojo thing. Yes, they didn't go about it the right way in the erasure parts or the cheating parts, and that's not okay. But I think the part that I struggle with is that I guess I'm on the opposite way of what happened to them. And either way, you see that bi erasure happening, where I identified as bisexual since the age of 12 and then suddenly decided, oh no, I'm actually identifying now as a lesbian or switch between that and queer, because queer just to me is like a whole umbrella.
Yeah,
so it
same.
just fits in there.
And in the same breath, there's nothing stopping you 10 years from now falling in love with a man again.
Exactly.
Like,
so that's
it's just an evolution of you.
I don't plan to.
No, but nobody, that's the thing though. And this is where
Nobody plans to.
This is where Lisa's research comes in. She is saying nobody actually plans their love life. No one actually plans those rigid things.
Because it's not a choice.
Yeah, exactly. So she enforces that while we still don't choose our sexual orientation, it can't be treated as something rigid and permanent, but more something that is fluid and free.
Yeah.
An excerpt from Lisa's The New Science of Sexual Fluidity states that by a certain point in our early adulthood, people seem to believe that we know exactly what we're looking for in a potential partner and that it is fixed after a certain point in early life development. Kind of like how by the end of grade 12, everyone expects you to know what job you want.
Or go straight to uni.
What career you want.
Yeah.
It's like you can't just definitively say, by this age, I know this.
You have no idea. I still got no idea.
Lisa's research states that actually, while the heterosexuals are still winning in terms of general population, the bisexuals actually have the next slot in population.
That makes sense to me.
Meaning more people are seemingly more sexually fluid than rigidly gay or straight, or even rigidly gay or lesbian. And as we know, there are plenty of other sexualities that fall in between those labels.
And again, I guess that's where the queerness label comes in for me, is because it's just a fluid label that holds all the terms under that one umbrella.
I agree. So Lisa challenges the social norm of settling into a sexual identity. After the research she found on sexual behaviour almost being exclusively from men, she set out her own studies starting in the 90s, following the sexual behaviours of women over a 20-year period. So over this time, she said she was pretty shocked by the fluidity of her subjects. Women who had been exclusively lesbian had fallen for male best friends and become involved, and women who were labelling themselves as bisexual were now exclusively lesbian.
Present.
I knew that you would identify with that. Lisa's studies also found that men weren't as rigid as they want society to think.
That's true.
This is what you said before. You think that, men are more sexually wanting to explore?
I think men have a curiosity, but a lot of the curiosity stays behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So I don't think it ever comes out. And again, that also comes back to the sexualization of porn and all that stuff. But yeah.
Well, Lisa says a lot of gay male participants have still had fantasies involving women or sexual fantasies including them in some way. And a lot of straight men had either given or received oral sex from another man in their lifetime.
I think you have to understand, as a human being, as a society, take away gender and sexuality altogether. We are curious creatures. So that's why our brains automatically go that way.
Totally. Lisa makes a point to say, even in men these days, I think the boundaries aren't as rigid as they used to be. I think one of the reasons it looks like it's more common in women is that we have given women in our culture more permission to be affectionate with other women, to have close relationships with other women that might spill over into unusual affection. And I think we have been more rigid with men, that men have to be men. And if men are going to have close emotional relationships, they're only going to be with women and not with other men. But some of those norms are changing, and I think men have more permission now to explore intimacy in a variety of ways with both male and female friends. So I think we'll find in another 10 to 15 years how much fluidity differs between women and men. Maybe the culture will have caught up for men as well as women.
Interesting.
I hope that's true, because I really feel in this sense that men have always been more ostracized than, say, lesbians or bisexual women, and that's probably because, as you said before, women have always seemed to have been more sexualized together like a fantasy rather than men.
Yeah, they have. And again, like I said, men having relations with men has been such a no-go. And again, it's the whole sexualization thing. You can be queer and have a threesome if it's two women, but the two men think, oh, that's a bit weird.
But yet throughout history, like we've seen in our history episodes, men have been having relationships with other men since the beginning of time.
Literally.
And we argue it's only since colonization came in that it was really a hard, firm fist to be like, no.
And I never understand why.
Yeah.
I'm like, what changed?
Yeah, I don't know. So Lisa also makes a point to say that we are who we are for a period of time and that we can have our sexuality like a snapshot in time. But as that only represents that certain period in our whole lives, we have the ability to grow and evolve. And with that, our needs also grow and evolve. I have to read this excerpt because it's so relevant to what we're seeing socially at the moment.
Sure.
So in this particular interview, Lisa is asked what the percentage is of people that she's studied that have exclusively said that they have same-sex attraction.
Right.
And I think you'll be blown away by the answer.
Dumbfounded.
So Lisa says, the most recent data suggests that about 14% of women and about 10% of men report some degree of same-sex attraction. And in both women and men, the vast majority of those individuals describe themselves as mostly, but not completely, heterosexual. So the largest group of individuals walking around with same-sex attractions are individuals who you would never know had same-sex attraction because they identify as heterosexual. They think they're mainly heterosexual, but Lisa likes to say they are heteroflexible.
I like that.
So the majority of individuals with same-sex attractions, and yet historically they've been completely invisible. We only now are starting to see what a big group they are, and it's worldwide. So basically, Lisa is saying that there is a general population of straight people admitting to having same-sex attraction but not identifying outside of a hetero label. And whether that's due to societal pressure or other factors, we don't really know.
Yeah.
Lisa also goes on to say, I think this just shows us that as a species, flexibility is our hallmark.
Amen.
There are a lot of animal species in which the process of selecting a mate and going about sex is very rigidly channeled. In some species, it only happens when you're capable of reproducing. We are not one of those species.
No.
One of the things about humans, with our huge brains and our huge social systems, is that we go about the process of affiliation and attachment and bonding and sex. It's really complex in a lot of social ways.
Yeah.
We use sexuality for purposes of affiliation, and we use affiliation for the purposes of mating. Sometimes it's not about procreation. In humans.
It's not. That's true. We add a sense of complexity to everything.
Lisa says there are sort of cross currents between love and attachment and friendship and sexuality. They're a lot more complicated than they are in other species because of our social groups and because of our huge social brains. Therefore, we should expect that these are flexible processes that we can obviously tweak in a number of ways.
I like that. I like the words heteroflexible.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a way of saying you're bisexual without saying you're bisexual.
I think it's a way of saying you're
Or fluid.
Yeah, because we say so many times, you don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know who you're going to create emotional and sexual bonds with.
I think that's the thing people forget. And again, usually straight men and hardened men, because that's what society has taught us. Men have to be manly men, blah, blah, blah.
And that's how they've been brought up to be. They've been brought up to be rigid and fit in a box.
Yeah, fit in a box. I think that's where you see those like stagnant things instead of letting them feel their feelings or be fluid, or like it's like the same thing now that men's mental health is spoken about so much more, because back in the past men's mental health, you can't have that.
You can't cry.
You can't cry. You're a girl.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
I think let's have a look at how society would be if we were taught that all very like stocky, like muscly guys, maybe truck driver looking guys, were all gay.
Yeah.
And it's like, how would we view society now if like that's what the typical gay man looked like? It would be so different because you weren't putting this like femininity on somebody.
And I think that's what people, and we've said it before, people aren't scared of the bisexuality or the fluidity or the queerness. People are scared of the femininity and allowing themselves to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And just bringing it back to the animals like we were talking about, animals have social construct, but not in the way of sexuality.
No.
They don't have social norms. They have constructs in terms of hierarchy and who's in charge, but they don't have construct in terms of two female meerkats can't lay together.
You also see with a number of different animals that some animals are hermaphrodites or able to switch between genders.
Yeah. And I read somewhere the other day that they struggle getting giraffes to mate because a lot of giraffes are attracted to male giraffes. So a lot of male giraffes are attracted to other male giraffes, and so they struggle to have them reproduce.
So does that make giraffes the gayest animal on this planet?
I don't know, because I'm sure there's a few. Okay, so Lisa also states that she has a bit of a problem with the quote, born this way.
Oh, from the Lady Gaga herself.
Yeah, well, as we know, Gaga is queen, so we're not going to pull her down.
No, I wasn't going to. I was just asking.
Lisa says she has a problem with this quote relating to homosexuality because if we believe that sexuality is fluid, then we weren't all born homosexual. We were just born fluid.
Yeah, okay.
And we're open to the evolution of our lives in ways that others maybe aren't.
I get that.
So as we know, and as we've said, not everyone is open to that evolution. Some people will stick with social norms because of social pressure, and it can be incredibly situational depending on what is happening in your life. Some people make decisions to or not to come out of the closet for safety, necessity, discomfort.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's all like about your environment and surroundings.
Yeah, and like we mentioned in another episode about sexuality, some women who have had terrible experiences with men will seek relationships with other women purely out of the discomfort that they have had. And that's 100% okay.
Yeah, that's 100% okay. And you can see it the other way around. Sometimes, you know, they've had negative relationships with women or people doing negative things that way that they go into the arms of a man. It just depends on how a person treats you. And if a person, no matter their gender, treats you with respect and communication and listening, of course, you're going to form that attachment.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think, tell me if this is controversial or not.
Dun, dun, dun.
But I also think this is where our transgender friends can really step in for people.
Yeah.
Because I feel like as a woman who maybe has experienced trauma from men, they can connect emotionally with someone who is maybe like AFAB.
Yeah.
But is male on the exterior. So they have that like attraction to that like male being, but they have the emotional connection because someone who is born AFAB might have more of a willingness to still be vulnerable rather than someone who is a cis man.
Yeah, so the cis men should be in trouble because if all the trans men are out there getting all
Getting
the
the
girls,
ladies,
getting all the ladies.
If that's who they want.
If that's who they want, yeah, the straight men are in trouble. That's what I'm going to say.
Okay, so there's also, moving on from the social structures and of that, there is also a current battle about same-sex attraction being in our genetic architecture.
Do explain.
So I've always thought that the homosexuality gene was hereditary. And I think we've spoken about this before.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have, don't you have a queer aunt? No, our friend has a queer.
Our friend has a queer aunt.
So our friend has a queer aunt.
Yeah.
I had a queer uncle. And so it's kind of like you pass that gene down. I've always thought that. I've always thought
I'm
it was
sure I
possible.
had queer family members, but I don't know.
Well, a lot of people think that it's untrue because they can't think of someone who has been homosexual in their family. But my argument is, how would you know?
Yeah, I was going to say, how would you know, especially when those people were brought up in a times where societal pressure was so against
Exactly.
homophobia. Is that literally what you were about to say?
We talk about it in a time where not everyone felt they could be openly themselves. So we don't know who in our families had to remain closeted for safety.
Well, didn't you say like you only found out about your uncle after he passed away?
Yeah, I found like all these love letters between him and this guy that he met in the Air Force, I think.
Yeah, so see?
That made me feel really sad because I feel like he never
got to live his true authentic self with his life partner that could have possibly been his life partner.
Exactly. So is there a same-sex attraction gene or is it a fluidity gene? We don't know.
I think that's just one for your own opinions, really.
Yeah. But I think
Or
if
it's a
everyone
mix
did a
against
deep dive, we would find that you probably do have a queer person in your family.
Probably. I need to do
Along
some
the line?
research. Well, like my mum is queer.
Yeah, your mum identifies as bisexual. So you're next in line.
I'm next in line. I'm just trying to think
Beyond
past that.
Yeah.
To be fair, I feel like my gran was probably fluid. She was here, there and everywhere.
Yeah. Well, one reason to do this episode besides the current celeb gossip with JoJo and Fletcher, and you mentioned Billie Eilish in the beginning. We didn't get into her.
We didn't get into her because it's not a massive thing.
I feel like Billie kind of does the right thing. She's never exclusively said, yes, I'm this, no, I'm not that. She's just kind of gone about her life and whatever people want to.
I think she's just said, yeah, I like girls, I like boys, what's up?
But she's just kind of gone about her life and whatever people are going to take from that, they're going to take from that.
Yeah.
You know? The reason that this affects me so much in like the fluidity spectrum is that because like when I split with my ex, who always identified as pansexual, when she left me, she started dating men, which is absolutely her right. I had so many people say to me, oh, is she straight now?
So stupid.
And honestly, that kind of attitude towards someone's fluidity I felt was really harmful to how I identified, because the next thing that you get after you get asked that is bigoted things like, oh, you turned her off women, or so did she ever like women, or were you the phase?
Yeah, that's really hard, especially for you as someone in that situation. I think other people like my ex got it from me leaving him to then being with women. I've always identified as bisexual. It's got nothing to do with the person. I think a lot of that also comes from the fact that people don't really understand what pansexuality is either.
But I think if we all viewed sexuality as this wide spectrum or as fluid, we would have less of these hard affecting opinions and they would just be irrelevant and they would carry less weight.
But again, everything comes from education, and when stuff has been hidden from society and not spoken about because it's so taboo for such a long time, of course there's going to be these unfortunate opinions.
How lovely would it be if we could just all be people and just exist?
That'd be amazing.
And we could just love the person that we want to love.
Yeah.
Without breaking the law.
Legally all good.
Yeah. So to end this episode, is sexuality a spectrum?
Yep.
Is all sexuality fluid?
Yep.
So sexuality continues to exist on a continuum rather than in binary or fixed categories. People's orientations, behaviours and identities span a wide range, and this kind of diversity needs to be normalised as simply being a human being.
Amen.
So with that being said, I think we've blabbed on enough.
I think so.
So until next week,
I guess you better remember to stay gay, motherfuckers.
I'm talking about, you're talking about, we're talking about just gay stuff.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Just Gay Stuff. Make sure to follow us at Just Gay Stuff Podcast on all your socials and write to us with your stories at justgaystuffpodcast@gmail.com.